This is the Garis Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 295, entitled Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Manslaving Women. Description. This is the first Garis Masculist MGTOW flyer that I have produced since migrating to Melbourne, Australia from Xiamen, China. I lived 12 years in China. I moved because my second Chinese wife and I lost interest in each other, so I had to move for marriage visa reasons and increasingly slow Chinese internet speeds using a VPN. It's a virtual private network. Now that I'm back in my first culture, largely for pension reasons, with immediate access to the culture and the language, I'll be able to test whether I am capable of bringing masculist thinking to Australia, in brackets, that I already did in Western Europe in the early 1980s in 7 countries: Belgium, Holland, France, UK, Germany, Denmark, Australia, in 4 languages: English, French, German, Dutch, with over 150 media appearances, close brackets. Changing the zeitgeist by bringing the masculist message to the broadcast media via university student newspapers/magazines. This flyer is an essay that I'm aiming to have published in university campus student newspapers, magazines across the country. It's a crystallization of masculist ideas aimed at university students to teach them that gender oppression is not a one-way street, and that if women don't vote with men to menfair the gender laws, then men will punish women severely by refusing to give them babies. Women will then be forced to choose between giving up their privileges in the divorce courts or having babies. I'm hoping that if my angry masculist approach really flies with the mass media, that I can serve as a model to other masculist leaders in other countries to take the same angry masculist approach in order to change public attitudes towards two-way gender oppression, and then to menfair the gender laws and to create a FIP Society. Now the flyer itself. One of the advantages of living in Australia is the internet speed is so much faster. It's almost instantaneous. Okay, here's the flyer itself. Maybe I'll make it a little bigger, just a minute. Okay. Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Introduction. The word masculist is the obvious male equivalent of the word feminist. Masculism is men's lib, which does the same kind of thing for men as feminism does for women. That is, it aims to liberate men from men unfair gender laws and to free men from the oppressive aspects of the traditional male role, for example, being manslaves to women. If you're a feminist reading this, you're probably asking yourself, what on earth do men have to be liberated from? Men are the privileged sex. We live in a male-dominated society, a patriarchy, so how can so-called masculism have any credible basis? This rather longish essay aims to teach you the core ideas of masculism and to persuade both men and women that gender repression is not a one-way street. Off the bat, I don't deny that men oppress women in many instances. In fact, if I were a female, I would probably be a feminist, a second-wave feminist, that is, believing in equal rights for women, equal access to the professions, equal opportunities for women, the legal right to terminate an unwanted pregnancy, etc. However, as a masculist, I do deny the opinion of many feminists that women do not oppress men. As this essay will show clearly, women do oppress men, and badly, but I'm getting ahead of myself. A lot of feminists feel threatened by the rise of the MGTOW and masculist movements. If you're not familiar with the MGTOW movement, MGTOW, stands for Men Going Their Own Way. They are an important branch of the men's lib movement. MGTOWs are men who reject marriage, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves, doing what they love, rather than being man-slaves to women, running a 1 in 4 risk of losing his kids and being financially massacred in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts. See below for the definition of the word fluffy. This essay takes the form of a glossary of masculist terms, which as a whole give a pretty coherent picture of what the masculists are espousing. So, glossary of masculist terms. Masculist equals a Manslaver, a person, male or female, who wants men to be freed from the oppressions of the traditional male role and who wants the gender laws menfaired. Masculism equals the ideology of the masculists, the male equivalent of feminism. FIP equals FIP equals financially independent person. That is, a person who is bothered to get a career-competent education that the economy values and pays well for, who expects not to parasite off the money of a man. Fluffy equals a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money of a man. The word is based on the word fluff, with connotations of being light, not serious, not responsible, not adult, not career competent, not fit. Fluffies are the enemy of the masculists, who label them, quote, immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin, end quote, to be wiped out by totally ignoring them, forcing them to rot on the shelf. Men, who invent everything, have given women the contraceptive pill, household gadgets, higher education, a life expectancy in the 80s and soon the 90s. So even women who have their 2 kids have a career window of some 4 decades. So the masculists point the finger at them and say, quote, now that women can work, they must work. Anything else is parasitism of the labour of men. Masculists see manslavery as slavery. Slavery rouses passions. Slavery is a war issue, and the masculists are at war against the fluffies and fluffy feminists, aiming to wipe them out. Forcing women to FIP up, that is, become FIPs, or not get a man. FIP Society equals a culture in which both sexes are socialised by parents and educated by teachers to FIP up, that is, to become FIPs, and not expect to live off the labour of another person. Masculist theorists are very conscious that the creation of a FIP society would go a long way towards resolving most of men's gender role problems. Fluffy FIP equals a FIP woman in terms of her career, but who still has traditional expectations of men. That is, she still sees men as cash machines who exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. Emo FIP, a FIP woman who has equal moral obligations. That is, she feels morally obliged to be a FIP and would feel ashamed to be a fluffy, parasiting off the labour of a man, not pulling her own financial weight. Fluffy feminist equals a feminist who has had her feminist consciousness raised, but not her masculinist consciousness raised, because she knows nothing about masculism. So by default, she still has traditional expectations of men, that is, seeing men as cash machines to pay for women. Masculists are particularly hostile towards fluffy feminists, seeing them as hypocrites who want equal rights in the parliaments, but behave as fluffies in the divorce courts, that is, wanting equal rights with men, but rejecting equal obligations with men, that is, sharing the burden of earning the living by bothering to get a career-competent education to become a FIP as an adult. Toxic divorce courts equals the divorce courts have been taken over by the fluffy feminists who have made them so toxic for males, see below, that they have spawned the MGTOW movement. MARA equals maternity rejection right equals, aka, also known as, abortion right, the legal right of a woman to terminate an unwanted, by her, pregnancy, a core achievement of the feminist movement in the 70s. Para equals paternity rejection right equals the not yet legal right of a man to reject an unwanted, by him, pregnancy. By filling in a paternity rejection form, he frees himself from the obligation to pay for a kid he does not want. If the mother goes ahead with the pregnancy, she will have full financial responsibility of the kid. The lack of a para is the most blatant example of sexual discrimination that exists, and it's not directed at women, but at men. See below. MGTOW equals men going their own way, equals a branch of the men's lib movement who quietly, passively walk away from marriage and paternity, spending their money on themselves. The rise of the MGTOW movement is due largely to the toxicity of the divorce courts as taken over by the fluffy feminists. Gender politician equals a politician who makes laws applicable to the genders. For example, the politicians who made the profoundly misandrous divorce laws that are so destructive to men and hence to society, indirectly wiping out whole populations. Gender crime equals a crime committed by one gender on the other. For example, women lying to men about being on the pill, getting pregnant against the man's will, and slamming a paternity suit on him, forcing him to pay for a kid he does not want, thus ruining his life. For women, an obvious example would be rape. Menfairing equals the verb to make the gender laws fair to men by removing customs that are oppressive to men, for example, being man-slaves to women, by creating a FIP Society. First halver/second halver men equals men living the first/second half of their lives, that is, men under/over 40. Most MGTOWs are first halver men, so tend to ignore the gender plight of second halver men for the obvious reason that these first halver MGTOWs have not lived long enough. Arcing, that's ARC, arcing equals after retirement careering. One of the attractions for men of being MGTOW is that they can refocus their lives away from being man-slaves to women, that is, paying for women to live in middle-class houses, raising her kids. MGTOWs can spend their money on themselves, save and invest heavily early in life, retire around 40, then live the second half of their lives doing what they want to do, and not what some nagging wife/femalien wants them to do. Sex war equals. If the toxicity of the divorce courts continues, so many young men will have gone MGTOW that whole populations will be wiped out within a mere century. Responsible males, masculinist soldiers, will not tolerate this. So if the gender politicians do not menfair the gender laws, for example in the divorce courts, bringing in the para, etc., then there may be a sex war in which masculinist soldiers assassinate gender politicians, murder thousands of feminist divorce court lawyers and judges, even shooting feminists in the street to ensure that whole populations are not wiped out. Feminazi genociders equals. The fluffy feminists have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for males that now 2/3 of young men in many countries under 35 refuse to marry and refuse to have kids. With the young generation reproducing only 1/3 of their number, then within a mere century whole populations will be wiped out. A century is 4 generations, so 1/3 of 1/3 of 1/3 of 1/3 is about 1%. So the other 99% dies off and the population has been destroyed. In the eyes of the masculists, this makes the hated fluffy feminists genociders because they are the root cause of the MGTOW paternity strike. Young women are seeing this too and are learning to hate the fluffy feminists as much as men do because young quality men refuse to give them their sperm. So young women can't have babies. Young women are now panicking over this in ever-growing numbers. Twee-tweffing equals 2A, 2F, that is, 2 apartments, 2 FIPs, is a relationship in which both the man and the woman have their own apartments and both are FIPs. They see each other on a regular basis, thus providing the man with the regular sex he needs without paying the traditional price of being a manslave, that is, working for a fluffy. Twee-tweffing forces the woman to be nice to the man because if she starts nagging, withholding sex, or tries to control him, he can so easily walk away, thus forcing her to be permanently nice to him, or she loses him. The reverse is also true, of course, so the relationship is much more civil, more cordial. Hypergamy equals the instinct of females to mate, to marry, up, that is, to a superior male who can supply her with his superior DNA, which will give her children superior DNA, which is good for the human species. Women evolve to coldly, disloyally, quickly dump her man, if he stopped providing her and her babies with scarce male-hunted meat. Her survival and that of her babies depended on her being like this. Fluffy crap equals the soft option majors at high school, that is, intellectually easy, intellectually lazy, memory-based, non-analytical subjects studied by the majority, that's 3/4, of young women in the senior years of high school, dooming them to become fluffies and not FIPs. Fluffy crappers equals young women who choose to study fluffy crap at high school, so are then obliged to study more fluffy crap at university because they lack the analytical prerequisites, that is, math and sciences, to study STEM, S-T-E-M, science, tech, engineering, math at university, nor the professions. So end up with a fluffy crap diploma that the economy does not value. So in her 30s, suffering baby rabies, she will look around for some gullible manslave to parasite upon so that he pays for her to raise her kids in a middle-class house that he pays for. Divorce rape equals when a man is financially massacred and has his life ruined in a fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system, he typically loses his kids with a 90% probability, loses half his stuff to his fluffy ex-wife, loses his house to her so she can raise her kids in it, and if the ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may have to pay her alimony so that she can remain a parasite of him after the divorce, the way she was before the divorce, with no moral nor legal obligations on her to FIP up and get a decent job. Modern marriage is now so toxic for males that MGTOWs and Masculists strongly urge young men not to marry, not to have kids. Because if they're silly enough to do so, then they will face a 1 in 4 chance of being financially crucified in the divorce courts, ruining his life. Only a small minority of men marries and has kids nowadays. The red pill equals the core idea of the MGTOWs, taken by analogy from the movie The Matrix. That is, the idea that, quote, women don't love men unconditionally, the way men do women, more so. If a man loses his sexploitability by a woman, she will coldly, quickly, disloyally dump him in favour of a more sexploitable male who can provide her with resources for her and her babies. The red pill is very difficult to swallow for men who have been brainwashed to believe that women love men, but they don't, not the way men do. Red pill rage equals. This is the rage men feel when they finally wake up to the reality that women love men conditionally, who will quickly dump a man who does not fulfill her hypergamous instincts. If a more sexploitable man realistically comes along, a woman will simply dump her current man and offer her vagina to the more sexploitable man. Femalians equals. Masculists see women as female aliens with minds evolved for different purposes, who think differently, judge the world differently, have 10% smaller brains, different values and priorities. Men have been forced until recently to be nice to women because, quote, men want to fuck them. Once the sex bots and the artworms, see just below, arrive, then men will find the femalian nature of women far less acceptable and will ignore women in droves. Sex bots equals sex robots for men. Life-size, lifelike, with film star faces, luscious curves, creamy, grippy vaginas, and increasingly equipped with the latest AI, that's artificial intelligence, so that men can talk to their bots who have market-driven, pleasant personalities that men vote with their dollars to buy. Early versions of sex bots are coming onto the market now. Outworms equals artificial wombs. Japanese scientists have already grown a goat in an artworm, so human babies are not far off. Once men can grow their own kids and prefer to sex their bots instead of fat or obese women, feminism will disappear overnight and women will be clawing each other in desperate competition for men's dwindling attention. Nawalt, that's N-A-W-A-L-T, equals a MGTOW term meaning not all women are like that. That is, there are some unicorn women out there who do not have the usual female qualities, that is, are not parasitic, not hypergamous, not sexploitative, etc. MGTOWs insist on the Awalt nature of women. MRM equals Men's Rights Movement, a US men's lib movement using largely the law to menfair the gender laws, for example, pushing for joint custody by default of kids after a divorce. Feminazi equals a particularly obnoxious form of feminist whom men despise. The Masculists claim that, quote, no man wants a relationship with a misandrist, man-dumping, feminazi bitch. Such women rot on the shelf, being utterly repulsive to men, who punish them by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them. Their feminazi bitch genes are then removed from the gene pool. End quote. Political wimps equals, this is a masculist term for MGTOWs, who are apolitically passive, who quietly walk away from marriage and paternity, who are unwilling to fight politically, unlike the masculists, who are very angry and confrontational with the fluffies and fluffy feminists, who push for the menfairing of the gender laws and the creation of a FIP society. Male frontal lobe switch off equals, men are handicapped by nature in the sense that when a man sees his regular female sexual partner, the frontal lobes of his brain switch off. The frontal lobes are responsible for planning and critical thinking. Nature evolved a man's brain to make it easier for a woman to sexploit him by giving him lots of sex early in the relationship so that his frontal lobes switch off, so that she can then control him much more easily, making it easier for her to extract male-hunted protein and resources from him for her and her babies, who depend for their very survival on his ability to bring home the bacon. All men need to recognize this phenomenon and be warned about it. The MGTOW 51% female voter argument equals, the MGTOWs argue that since women are the majority of voters and that more women vote than men, that the gender politicians will always vote in favour of women. Otherwise, women will block vote them out of power. The MGTOWs claim that this critical argument makes political action on the part of the Masculists and MRMs a waste of time, and that the only effective action for MGTOWs is to walk away from marriage and paternity, thus crashing the culture, forcing the menfairing of the gender laws. Masculist refutation of the 51% female voter argument equals, the Masculists refute this argument that holds so much sway with the MGTOWs by saying that if women don't vote with men to menfair the gender laws, then Masculists will simply use MGTOW tactics to punish women by not giving them babies, which is ultimately what women most desperately want. Women will prefer to have babies by menfairing the gender laws with men than to keep their privileges in the divorce courts that currently so massacre men and ruin their lives, that is, one married father in 4. Female intellectual inferiority equals, the Masculists use science to show that women are intellectually genetically inferior to men, and hence Masculists can crush any pretense on the part of the feminists to claim that women are men's equals. The most damning fact about women is their 10% smaller brains, which is a lot, like taking an ice cream scoop out of the male brain, that is 10 billion fewer neurons, that is 10% less neural processing capacity. So it's not surprising that men have won 99% of the science Nobel Prizes, and that women don't invent much, don't build much, don't create much. Women have a 10% smaller IQ variance, and in brackets, see the GMV definition just below, so that the morons and the genii are males. Men have much higher testosterone levels than women, so are much more aggressive, more ambitious, driven, dogged, and achieve difficult tasks much more readily than women. All cultures know this, which is why boy babies are more valued than girl babies. A boy baby is much more likely to grow up to be a highly valued member of the culture than a girl baby, who will be just another baby factory and child raiser, which is a vital function, but it's not status worthy, because any woman can do those things. GMV, brackets, greater male variance, equals, men have only one X chromosome in their cells, and women 2. There are many more recessive genes than dominant genes, so a greater variety of genes get used in men than women. So on just about anything measurable, Men will show a greater population-wide variance than women. For example, the 10% greater IQ variance of men over women, which explains why men dominate everything. The feminists are right when they talk about the patriarchy. To the feminists, the patriarchy is an institution they want removed. To masculists, it's a genetic fact that will not go away until women are genetically engineered. Female masculists equals. Increasingly now, young women are learning to hate the feminazis as much as men do, because they're waking up to the idea that it's due to the takeover of the divorce courts by the fluffy feminists that quality young men refuse to give young women their sperm. So these women are becoming female masculists to oppose the feminazis, so that the gender laws are made menfair, so that men can be persuaded to be fathers again, without facing the awful risk of 1 chance in 4 of being divorce raped, that is, financially massacred and having his life destroyed by the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts. So it's in young women's self-interest to combine forces with young men to menfair the gender laws, for example in the divorce courts, bringing in the para, etc., so that young women can have babies again. Young women are really starting to panic now that over 2/3 of young men in many countries now refuse to marry and have babies. That is, they are going MGTOW in practice, if not in philosophy. Workplace gender segregation equals. Most women have absorbed feminist ideas and know nothing about masculinist ideas, so can be downright bitches to men in the workplace. So increasingly men are voting with their feet, moving their desks and offices to be free from the feminazi attitudes of their female colleagues so they can quietly, efficiently get on with their work and not have to walk on eggshells, avoiding the wrath of feminazis whom men increasingly despise and want to avoid. Female shit tests equals. Women evolved to be critically dependent on men for their survival. A woman who did not get a man risks starvation, so women need to be sure that their man still loves her. So she tests him by provoking him, a shit test. If the man reacts negatively, then that shows her that he still cares about her enough to react with real emotional energy. If, however, he cares so little for her that he is indifferent, then she becomes alarmed and starts looking for a more exploitable male. When his frontal lobes have switched off and he's become putty in her hands, she also shit tests him to see what his limits to her manipulation and exploitation of him are. Masculist goals. The main aims of the masculists are to wipe out fluffies by totally ignoring them, forcing them to FIP up or rot on the shelf, similarly with the fluffy feminist hypocrites. Masculists want to create a FIP society, thus solving most of men's gender issues, for example, making it easier to bring in the para. If a woman's a FIP, she can take care financially of her kid if she gets sole custody. Masculists want an across-the-board removal of gender laws that are men unfair, for example, bringing in the para, the biggest one. Men fairing the divorce courts, for example, making custody of kids joint by default, throwing out alimony, etc., and many other ways men are discriminated against by the law. Masculist/MGTOW resources. See 300 of my Masculist/MGTOW YouTube, minds.com, etc. videos on masculist ideas on my website on the first page of this flyer. For MGTOW videos, Google Sandman or Turd Flinging Monkey, it's TFM, and many others. Ciao.